The pages of the Bible not only tell stories of faith and promises, but also reveal the roots of conflicts that have persisted for millennia. As events unfold, we encounter characters and moments that shape the identity of nations and the destiny of peoples. What drives Jews and Arabs to such an intense and enduring rivalry? What are the hidden truths behind their intertwined histories which still echo in our time? Why are these people seemingly always at war? As we delve into biblical narratives, we find explanations that not only shed light on the past but also offer a vital understanding of contemporary challenges. Get ready for a journey that explores the complexities and connections that may define these relationships, revealing that war and peace often have deep roots in promises and choices made long ago. As always, don't forget to click like and let us know in the comments where you are watching this video from. Now let's dive into the story. In the vast desert of ancient Mesopotamia, during a moment of profound revelation, God called Abraham an ordinary man and made him an extraordinary promise that would change the course of history. In Genesis 1:2, the Lord declared, "I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing." These words echoed as a divine commitment, a promise that would span generations, bringing forth not only a lineage but also an eternal covenant. Imagine Abraham, a man of faith, living in a time when fertility and descendants were synonymous with honor and legacy. He and his wife, Sarah, both advanced in age, carried the emotional weight of years without children, a pain that loomed over them like a constant shadow. The divine promise not only challenged them, but also sparked a burning expectation in their hearts, the expectation that even in their old age, a great nation would come from their line. However, the wait for the fulfillment of this promise became a heavy burden. Sarah's barrenness, an agonizing issue, began to wear down the couple's patience and hope. As the years passed, each month without a pregnancy became a reminder of the impossible. Impatience started to creep into their lives. In moments of despair and disillusionment, Sarah reflected on how the promise could be fulfilled. And these doubts led her to seek human solutions for what seemed to be a divine problem. The promise God had made to Abraham became a distant light, a hope that felt increasingly out of reach. Amid this anguish, Sarah began to consider alternatives, reflecting on the cultural norms of her time, which allowed a woman to offer her servant as a concubine to her husband in the hopes of securing a lineage. One quiet afternoon, as the sun set on the horizon, Sarah made a proposal that would change the course of their lives. She approached Abraham with a mixture of hesitation and determination, and said, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can build a family through her." This suggestion, born out of despair, seemed like a practical solution in a world where social norms dictated that fertility was a matter of status and honor. In the nomadic culture in which they lived, procreation was essential for the survival and continuity of clans. Therefore, the practice of using servants to conceive children was not uncommon. It was a widely accepted, and even expected, strategy to ensure the family's legacy. Hagar, the Egyptian servant, was available, and Sarah's proposal seemed not only a response to her frustration, but also a way to take a step forward in fulfilling the divine promise that hovered over them. Abraham, on his part, accepted Sarah's suggestion, perhaps more out of love for her than out of a genuine desire to seek another path. Thus, in a moment that should have been filled with joy, the relationship between Sarah, Abraham, and Hagar began to complicate. The decision made by Abraham and Sarah had consequences that would echo through the generations. When Hagar conceived and her belly began to grow, the family dynamic shifted dramatically. Sarah, who initially believed this would be a solution to her pain, now felt threatened by the new reality. The presence of Hagar, who had once been just a servant, became a constant reminder of her own inability to bear children. The relationship between the two women quickly deteriorated. The servant, now pregnant, looked upon Sarah with a mix of contempt and superiority, while Sarah became consumed by jealousy and insecurity. This scene of tensions and rivalries exemplified how human intervention in divine plans, even when well-intentioned, could result in misunderstandings and divisions. In a moment of desperation and anger, Sarah began to mistreat Hagar, who, overwhelmed by the weight of the situation, decided to flee into the desert in search of relief and freedom. In this act of Hagar not only distanced herself physically from Sarah, but she also found herself in an internal struggle between her role as a mother and the oppression she endured. She had been placed in a difficult position, and the pressure of the situation pushed her beyond the limits of what she could bear. In the desert, Hagar found herself alone and desperate, a state that led her to contemplate the possibility of losing everything, her child and her own life. It was in this moment of solitude that an angel of the Lord found her and delivered a message of hope filled with meaning and revelations that would change her future and her child's future. Hagar learned that even in pain and marginalization, God saw her and heard her affliction. This encounter with the angel was not just a divine intervention in a critical moment, it was a transformation in Hagar's life. She left the desert not merely as a mother in despair, but as a woman who had found God in her anguish, receiving a new purpose and renewed faith. Hagar, now strengthened by the divine promise, no longer saw the desert as a place of loneliness, but as a sacred space where God's love and compassion had been revealed in a tangible way. Hagar, comforted by the message of the angel of the Lord, who instructed her to return, realized that what was to come was greater than her own pain. Back in Abraham's household, the atmosphere remained tense and conflicted. But now, she carried within her the promise of a future. The anticipation of her pregnancy and the growth of the child inside her brought mixed emotions for Hagar. Although she knew that the relationship between her and Sarah remained strained, the realization of the miracle of pregnancy was something that lifted her spirits. The conception of Ishmael was not only an answer to Hagar's pain, but also a step towards the fulfillment of God's promises to Abraham. Amid the suffering and depression, the baby she carried began to give her life new meaning. Ishmael was born into a context full of complexities. Abraham's joy at the birth of Ishmael was evident. As described in Genesis 16:15-16, so Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. The name, meaning God hears, reflected the deep connection between Hagar's pain and divine compassion. However, this joy was overshadowed by the tension between Hagar and Sarah. The presence of Ishmael, Hagar's son, began to make Abraham's wife feel increasingly threatened and insecure. Sarah, who had been the one to suggest that Abraham take Hagar as a concubine, now faced the consequences of her decision. The oppression Hagar had previously endured seemed to repeat itself, this time in the form of Sarah's burning jealousy and growing hostility. Even now, as a mother, Hagar faced the difficulties of living in a hostile environment. The relationship between the two women had become unbearable. The oppression and contempt that Sarah directed at Hagar had turned into a painful reality. In moments of sorrow and humiliation, Hagar sought comfort in her role as a mother. But the constant provocations and tension in Abraham's household made her life unbearable. Ishmael, still a baby, symbolized the promise, but he was also the center of a rivalry that was far from resolved. His childhood would not be peaceful. He would grow up in an environment filled with uncertainty, where his identity and worth were constantly in question. Hagar found herself trapped in a cycle of pain, powerless in the face of Sarah's oppression, and with no safe place to raise her son. Yet, Ishmael's presence also brought Hagar a renewed sense of purpose. The love she had for him became a beacon amid the emotional storm she lived through. The name Abraham had given him represented more than just a label. It was a constant reminder that God had seen her affliction and in some way promised a better future. However, in the midst of these adversities, God continued to fulfill his promises, offering comfort and hope. In Genesis 17, when Abraham was already an elderly man, God decided to renew his promises to him, including those concerning Ishmael. While revealing that Sarah would give birth to Isaac, the son of the covenant, God also reaffirmed his commitment to Ishmael. He declared, "As for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful, and will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation." Genesis 17:20. This promise not only granted Ishmael a meaningful identity but also established a bright future, even though he held a secondary position compared to Isaac. The renewal of the promise to Ishmael was a testimony to God's love and mercy. Despite not being the primary son of the covenant, Ishmael was still important to God. The declaration that he would become the father of 12 rulers and a great nation echoed the blessing that had been promised to Abraham. This inclusion of Ishmael in the divine narrative shows that even in the most challenging and unexpected circumstances, God's goodness extends to all his children, regardless of their origin or status. When comparing the promise to Ishmael with that of Isaac, we see an interesting contrast in the nature of the blessings. Isaac would be the son of the covenant, the one through whom God's promises to Abraham would be fulfilled more directly and specifically. He would carry the lineage through which the nation of Israel would be formed. On the other hand, Ishmael was called to be the father of a nation just as significant, but he was not the primary heir of the covenant. This highlights a fundamental reality about God's promises. He can work in different spheres and in various ways, and his promises can be fulfilled in diverse contexts. These promises, both to Isaac and Ishmael, remind us that even amid difficulties and uncertainties, God has a plan that may go beyond what we can imagine. The lives of Ishmael and Isaac would reflect God's faithfulness and his ability to work in situations that often seem impossible. While Isaac would become the bearer of God's promises to the nation of Israel, Ishmael would receive a great blessing that ensured his own significance in history. The birth of Isaac is one of the most significant moments in the biblical narrative, filled with emotions, expectation, and the fulfillment of God's promises. After years of waiting and longing, Abraham and Sarah's story would finally culminate in the arrival of this promised son. Sarah, who had struggled with infertility for decades, had finally received the life-changing news. In her old age, she would give birth to a son. This divine promise had been made to Abraham when he was 99 years old, and Sarah was already 90. Sarah's disbelief was immediate, reflecting not only the skepticism of someone who had faced many disappointments, but also the surprise of knowing that the impossible could happen. She laughed to herself, questioning, "After I'm worn out, and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure?" Genesis 18:12. Genesis 18. However, the story does not end with doubts and laughter of disbelief. The culminating moment arrived when, after months of waiting, Sarah finally gave birth to Isaac. The birth was a festive event, a moment of indescribable joy that resonated through the tents of Abraham and Sarah. When the baby was born, what followed was an explosion of emotions, the fulfillment of a divine promise that had once seemed impossible, a sign of God's care and faithfulness. Sarah could not contain the joy overflowing in her heart. She exclaimed, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." Genesis 21:6. Sarah's laughter was now different. It was a laugh of pure happiness, of relief and gratitude. The smile that once reflected skepticism had transformed into a smile of joy and celebration. Isaac's arrival was not only the fulfillment of a promise, but a testament that God is faithful to his word, even when circumstances seem impossible. The name Isaac, meaning laughter, symbolizes not only what happened to Sarah, but also the transformation that faith can bring. The laughter that once reflected doubt had now become a symbol of joy and hope. By naming her son this way, Sarah was not only acknowledging God's goodness, but also allowing herself to fully experience the depth of joy that faith can bring. Isaac's birth not only reaffirmed God's covenant with Abraham, but also marked the beginning of a new era in the history of salvation. Through Isaac, God's promises would continue to unfold, forming the foundation of the nation of Israel, and later, the entire story of redemption. As time passed, The family dynamics around Abraham became increasingly complicated. Ishmael, now a young man, lived in the shadow of the rivalry and tensions that surrounded his life, and that of his half-brother Isaac, the child of the promise. Both were sons of Abraham, but the circumstances of their births and the promises associated with each created a deep rift between them and their mothers. In Genesis 2:9-10, the situation reaches an intense moment of confrontation. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking, and she said to Abraham, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." Sarah's demand, though painful, revealed the complex dynamics of family relationships and the emotional pressures the situation created. The rivalry between the sons wasn't just a clash of personalities, it was a reflection of societal expectations, divine promises, and human frailties. Hagar, who had endured humiliation and scorn, now faced the prospect of losing everything once again. Ishmael, for his part, bore the weight of being labeled the slave woman's son, and all that entailed for his identity. Although Abraham loved Ishmael, Sarah's desire for security and exclusivity in Isaac's inheritance put him in a challenging position. Abraham found himself torn between loyalty to his wife and love for his firstborn. With a heavy heart, Abraham decided to comply with Sarah's request. He prepared some bread and water for Hagar and her son and sent them away into the wilderness. It was a painful scene. The anguish of separation and the uncertainty of what lay ahead weighed on Abraham. Hagar, once again alone, was forced to face the harsh realities of life in the desert, carrying with her Ishmael, a boy now aware of the complexity surrounding his existence. The departure of Hagar and Ishmael wasn't merely a physical displacement, it was an act with lasting repercussions. They wandered in the wilderness, facing intense hardship, scarcity of water, and the constant threat of death became their new reality. Yet, in this desolate setting, God intervened once more. Having been cast out from Abraham's household, they now found themselves in a place without shelter, far from the safety and protection they once knew. The bread and water they carried were limited, and the brutal reality of the desert was becoming alarmingly apparent. With a heart filled with anguish, Hagar looked at her son, now sensitive to the gravity of their plight. Ishmael, once surrounded by love and care, now felt the weight of abandonment. The lack of water became an increasingly dire threat, and Hagar knew that without a miracle, their survival was uncertain. Days stretched on, and the hope she once held began to fade, replaced by the pain and fear that her son might not survive. In a moment of despair, Hagar realized she could no longer bear to watch Ishmael suffer with tears in her eyes. She placed the boy under the shade of a tree and walked away. Unwilling to witness the imminent tragedy, it was an act of desperation and love. She knew there was nothing more she could do. Deep within, she cried out to God, though the sense of distance from her Lord felt overwhelming. It was in this moment of desolation that God, who never abandons his children, intervened. In Genesis 21:17, the Bible tells us God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there." The angel's call was not just a distant echo, but a direct manifestation of God's care, acknowledging Hagar's suffering and Ishmael's pain. What followed was a transformative moment. The angel not only brought words of encouragement, but also a promise of provision. He instructed her to lift Ishmael, and not to fear. "Lift the boy up, and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation." These words were not mere promises, they reaffirmed the life and future God had reserved for them. Hagar then looked up, and in his infinite mercy, God revealed a nearby well. The water, symbolizing life and renewal, emerged as a testament to divine care, showing that even in the darkest circumstances, God never forgets his children. This miracle was not just an act of mercy, it was a clear display of divine providence for those in desperate situations. The fresh, pure water allowed Hagar and Ishmael to regain their strength and renew the hope that seemed depleted. Hagar found not only water but also confirmation that God hears and responds to the cries of his children. As Ishmael drank, Hagar felt a surge of gratitude fill her heart. She recognized that God had been with them all along, even in moments of anguish and despair. This desert experience would become a lasting testimony of God's care, a reminder that even when all seemed lost, hope could be reborn through divine intervention. The desert, initially a symbol of loneliness and desolation, now became a place of renewal and discovery. Hagar understood that her life and Ishmael's were in the hands of a God who not only made promises but fulfilled them in supernatural ways. As the years passed, Ishmael grew into a strong and skilled young man, shaped by the unique circumstances of his life. Raised under the loving guidance of his mother, Hagar, he learned to survive the harsh conditions of the desert. From a young age, Ishmael displayed a natural aptitude for what many considered essential skills for nomadic life. The desert was not just his home. It was a school where Ishmael quickly learned to hunt and move skillfully across the arid terrain. Life in the desert demanded resilience and courage, qualities Ishmael possessed in abundance. He became an exceptional archer, his skill with the bow and arrow standing out, enabling him to hunt effectively and provide for himself and his mother. Genesis 21:20-21 highlights this crucial transition in his life. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. This phrase captures not only Ishmael's reality as a young hunter but also the continuous care of God, who remained by his side in his adventures and challenges. As Ishmael matured, Hagar began to think about his future. The isolation and difficulty of living solely within the desert sands were evident. And Hagar desired for Ishmael to find a companion. In the culture they lived, family bonds and alliances formed through marriage were highly valued. So, Hagar sought a wife for Ishmael, one who would not only love him but also be rooted in their traditions. With this in mind, Hagar made a significant choice by finding an Egyptian wife for Ishmael. This decision held deep cultural and historical implications. Transcribed by choosing a woman from her own homeland, Hagar reinforced the connections between two lineages, that of Ishmael, son of the Egyptian servant, and that of Abraham, the Hebrew patriarch. This union symbolized the intersection of Arab and Egyptian cultures, a legacy that would resonate throughout history. Ishmael's marriage was not only a new chapter in his life, but also a reflection of the continuity of the lineage God had promised him. Ishmael's descendants would become significant in biblical and historical contexts, forming the foundation of many Arab tribes that would inhabit the region over generations. This link with Egyptian culture also highlighted the richness and diversity of traditions that would influence future history. As Ishmael settled into his married life, he did not stray from his roots. Life in the desert and his past experiences had shaped his character and skills. He was not only an archer, but also an emerging leader, a man who knew how to survive and thrive in the harshest conditions. God's presence in his life was evident in his ability to overcome obstacles, and the love for his wife brought new meaning to his world. Ishmael became a symbol of strength and resilience. An embodiment of God's promises echoing through his lineage, he was not just Abraham's son, he was a bridge between cultures. A man who carried a legacy of faith and survival. Through his achievements and challenges, Ishmael continued to shape his own story, and that of his people, affirming that divine providence manifests in ways that often surpass human understanding. As time passed, and Ishmael established his own family in the desert, his lineage became an essential part of the history of Arab tribes. Ishmael would become the patriarch of 12 tribes, each representing the descendants who would spread across vast regions of the Middle East. These tribes, known as the Ishmaelites, played significant roles in various biblical and historical narratives, perpetuating the legacy of their ancestor and the divine promise made to Hagar and Ishmael. These 12 tribes, developing from Ishmael's life and his sons, reflected the diversity and cultural richness of Arab heritage. Each tribe had its name, traditions, and customs, together forming a complex network of relationships that connected families over time. The story of Ishmael and his descendants is a powerful representation of how divine promises manifest across generations and of God's continued presence in his people's lives. The connection between Ishmael and Isaac should not be underestimated. Although Isaac was the child of the covenant, the relationship between the two half-brothers is one of the most intriguing aspects of the biblical narrative. In Genesis 2:5-9, we find a moment of unity and reconciliation when both come together to bury their father, Abraham, in the cave of Machpelah. This act, beyond being a filial duty, symbolizes the overcoming of rivalries and family tensions that had marked their lives since childhood. The burial of Abraham is a moment laden with significance, symbolizing not only the farewell to a beloved father, but also the continuation of the legacy he left behind. Ishmael and Isaac, though raised in different contexts, found common ground in this important event, recognizing that despite their differences, they were part of the same heritage. This moment of unity suggests that amid disputes and rivalries, the bond of blood and family connection still holds undeniable power, allowing them to come together for a greater purpose. The importance of family relationships is a recurring theme in the biblical narrative. From the promises made to Abraham to the stories of his children and grandchildren, each generation is shaped by bonds of love, rivalry, conflict, and reconciliation. The narrative of Ishmael and Isaac illustrates that even when divisions seem irreparable, circumstances can lead to moments of reconciliation and unity, highlighting God's sovereignty in guiding these relationships. As Ishmael's descendants spread and established their tribes, interactions between the Ishmaelites and Israelites also became part of the historical lineage of God's people. Over the centuries, the relations between these lineages influenced political and social events in the region, reflecting the complexity of the heritage that both brothers represented. Ishmael's relevance in the biblical story is significant, as he is often mentioned as the progenitor of various Arab tribes, creating a link between Judeo-Christian and Islamic traditions. In the context of Judaism and Christianity, Ishmael is recognized as the son, representing what could be seen as the secondary line of Abraham's heritage, while Isaac became the primary heir to the promises. However, God did not disregard Ishmael. Instead, he made specific promises to him and his descendants, ensuring that Ishmael would also be the father of a great nation. The Ishmaelites, descendants of Ishmael, would have a lasting impact on the history and traditions of the region. As emerging Arab tribes, they became influential across various cultures and civilizations, playing vital roles in shaping the Middle East. The Ishmaelite tribes are often associated with nomadism, strength, and resilience, and their traditions intertwined with those of other cultures, creating a rich and diverse tapestry. Beyond their historical presence, Ishmael's legacy is reflected in traditions that endure today. Arabs consider themselves descendants of Ishmael, and his story remains a fundamental part of the cultural and religious identity celebrated in contemporary Arab communities. In Islam, Ishmael is regarded as a prophet and symbol of faith. His willingness to submit to God's will, and his ability to survive and thrive amid adversity, make him an admirable example for many. Judaism and Islam, the religions that emerged from these lineages, also reflect the cultural and religious diversity that characterizes Jews and Arabs. The Jewish religious foundation, centered on the Torah and Mosaic laws, contrasts with the teachings of Islam, based on the Quran, and the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad. The distinction between the two belief systems is not only theological but also cultural, influencing social practices, worldviews, and the way each group relates to the other. Over the centuries, tensions between Jews and Arabs have intensified, fueled by issues of identity and the struggle for land and power. The divine promises that initially were meant to unite have become a battleground, where one group's rights are often measured against the others. The impact of modern conflicts, particularly in the context of Israel and Palestine, reflects these historical tensions. Events surrounding the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, subsequent Arab-Israeli wars, and the ongoing fight for Palestinian self-determination are all episodes that illustrate how the promises made to Isaac and Ishmael, along with their respective religious traditions, continue to shape contemporary dialogue, while the conflicts between Jews and Arabs are deeply rooted in a history of rivalry and promises they do not align with God's sovereign plan for humanity from the beginning of creation. The Lord set forth a purpose of love, peace, and reconciliation, desiring that all nations would unite harmoniously under his authority. The divisions that arose throughout human history, including the tensions between Abraham's descendants, reflect not God's original intention, but God's will. But the complexity of human nature and the free will he granted each of us. The Bible is a constant testimony of God's desire for restoration and reconciliation. In Genesis 12:3, God makes a promise to Abraham, "I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." This declaration not only affirms the divine blessing upon Abraham's lineage, but also underscores that God's purpose has always been to reach all nations. His love is not confined to a single people or territory. It transcends borders and tribes, encompassing all humanity. Thus, contemporary conflicts reveal a need to return to this fundamental principle of unity and love. Throughout biblical history, we find examples of how God worked amid tensions and rivalries to fulfill his plans. Abraham himself, though the father of two lineages, experienced divisions within his own family. Yet God made promises to both sons, showing that even in separation, his providence and care remained. It's a powerful reminder that even in discord, God does not abandon his children, but continues to weave a tapestry of grace and hope. Jesus, through his message of love and reconciliation, calls us to love one another. In Matthew 5:44 he teaches, "But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." This call to unity and love challenges each of us, regardless of our ethnic or religious differences. The true essence of Christ's teaching lies in the ability to see beyond rivalries and recognize our shared humanity, inviting us to heal wounds and build bridges where walls once stood. Moreover, the promise that one day all nations will gather under God's lordship is a truth that should inspire hope. In Revelation 7:9, we glimpse a vision of a glorious future. "After this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb." This image of diversity united in worship illustrates God's plan for reconciliation, where every voice, culture, and story has its place. Reflecting on these principles, we are challenged to seek peace and promote reconciliation in our own lives and communities. Each of us has the power to act as agents of change, practicing love, compassion, and forgiveness. In Romans 12:18, the Bible exhorts us, "If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone." This instruction reminds us that peace is a collective responsibility, and it is up to us to pursue harmony, even in a world marked by division. Finally, as we look to the future, we should remember that, while conflicts may persist, God's plan is greater than any human division. He is a God of hope and restoration who longs to see his creation united in love. The promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Ishmael are not just stories of the past. They speak to us of God's faithfulness and his ongoing commitment to guide us toward peace. May we find inspiration in these truths and strive to be bearers of light in a world so in need of healing and reconciliation. Amen. Through prayer, mutual understanding, and loving action, may we contribute to the fulfillment of God's divine plan of unity, where all nations gather in worship of the Creator. If you enjoyed this video and these reflections, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and click on one of the videos that will appear on your screen. They'll bring more powerful teachings and biblical insights that I'm sure you'll love. Thank you for watching, take care, and God bless.